Neil deGrasse Tyson tweeted, "In school, rarely do we see how data become facts, how facts become knowledge, and how knowledge becomes wisdom." I sure hope that Tyson is right. That's the last thing we want our students to learn. It's not true. Data does indeed lead to facts, but because the data is interpreted, it also leads to opinions about what is factual. And some of the facts will be facts for only a little while. And facts are part of knowledge, but knowledge is comprised of more than just facts. For someone to be knowledgeable, they need to have had experiences. And they would need to be well read, not just nonfiction, but literature as well. This is not so that they can be knowledgeable about fiction, but so that they can be knowledgeable about life. As for knowledge leading to wisdom, thank goodness students are still expected to take the Odd Humanities course, where they can begin to understand that knowledge doesn't lead to wisdom, or doesn't necessarily lead to wisdom. Okay, so maybe Neil hasn't read Othello or Frankenstein, but he must certainly have seen Silence of the Lambs. Literature reminds us that wisdom is not a byproduct of knowledge, nor does a lack of knowledge make one a fool. Consider Lear's Fool, Samwise Gamgee, or Dostoevsky's Prince Myshkin. Neil deGrasse Tyson's beliefs are unlit by the light of the gospel, but his veneration of factual knowledge is held by many Christians. I know of a Christian science teacher, not at my school of course, who told their students that English class is important because you learn the practical skill of writing, but the stories and poetry that they teach is a waste of time. There's this idea out there about poetry that it's just a bunch of emotional fluff with alliteration and a rhyme scheme. Some of it is. That stuff written by grade 6 versifiers might be, but even the most emotional stuff of the Romantic poets was far from fluffy. A lot of people are under the impression that because literature doesn't deal with facts, it doesn't deal in truth, especially poetry. Some branches of the church, especially in America, apply Neil deGrasse Tyson's ideas to the Bible. It's like they are saying the Bible is true. Truth is fact. The Bible is, therefore, fact. This leads them to read much of the Bible as if it were a textbook or an encyclopedia. Although not as extreme, I once heard a pastor say, "When in doubt about a passage in the Bible, I read it literally." There's nothing wrong with reading something literally when it's meant to be read literally. But if we don't know how to read it, defaulting to a modern or scientific hermeneutic doesn't make any sense. I would like to assert that facts are not the same thing as truth. While it is true that literature does not necessarily deal with facts, it does in fact deal with truth. In my English class, I use eagles to make this point. That facts can be true, but there's a lot more truth out there than the facts, and sometimes these truths are best communicated with poetic language, perhaps only with poetic language. I have my students take about 5 minutes to collect a bunch of facts about bald eagles, and we fill a whiteboard with them. Here's a sample of what we find. Bald eagles can fly to an altitude of 10,000 feet. They have 7,000 feathers. Lifting power is about 4 pounds. Once paired, bald eagles remain together until one dies. These items gleaned from encyclopedias are factual, and they are also probably true. Then we look at Tennyson's poem called The Eagle. He clasps the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands, ringed with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls, he watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. In this simple 6-line poem, Tennyson attempts to communicate that eagles are, in a word, awesome. Not awesome in the way that kids use it, as in having a favorable emotional response, but awesome in an unsettled encounter with the sublime. I had an experience similar to the one that Tennyson is trying to communicate. When I was 8 or so, I went with my class to a bird sanctuary. After viewing crows and seagulls and owls recovering from various injuries, I came face to face with a bald eagle, close up. It looked at me, and then it looked away. I was awed by his size, his talons, his beak, his eyes, and his haughty indifference. My reaction was simple. I whispered, "Whoa." Tennyson attempts to communicate in his 6-line poem what I did in my one word: the woe-ness of eagles. We fill another whiteboard with notes about Tennyson's poem. I'll give you a quick summary of this lesson. He clasps the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun. We have those K sounds in the first line and a bit that give us the sound of those powerful and sharp talons grabbing onto this rocky outcropping. Then we have the personification. It gives the eagle crooked hands. The fact that they're crooked suggests age. And age in literature is going to bring to mind a couple of things, most likely frailty or wisdom. So we don't know how to apply this yet because we haven't finished reading the poem. Then we move on to close to the sun and lonely lands. The fact that the eagle is associated with the sun sort of goes back to this medieval notion of the great chain of being, where gold is the top of metals. The oak is at the top of the category of trees. The king is at the top of the category of humanity. The lion is at the top of the category that includes all the animals. The oyster is at the bottom, by the way. All these things that are at the top of their respective categories are metaphorically or analogically linked to each other. So close to the sun means he's close to kingship in this case, in lonely lands. Ringed with the azure world he stands. Next line, the wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. So we have poems all through literature that talk about the greatness and the power and the vastness of the ocean. But in this poem, the ocean is crawling beneath the eagle. The next line, he watches from his mountain walls, metaphorically compares the mountain to a castle. And he's watching from the walls of a castle. Now, who does this? Well, that's a king. And like a thunderbolt, he falls. And when I ask students about who or what is associated with thunderbolts, they all say Zeus and Thor, which are near the top or at the top of their respective pantheons. In effect, with some practice reading poetry, readers of this poem experience the power and the strength of this majestic bird as it is metaphorically compared to a wise and solitary king whose authority is absolute. In doing this, Tennyson is attempting to capture what I attempted to capture in my one word when I came across this bald eagle close up, and that is, whoa. Neither are probably completely adequate, but both get closer to the truth about an eagle than the phrase, eagles are awesome. Or the phrase, the eagle's wingspan ranges from 72 to 90 inches. I asked my students which is truer, the lists of facts on the first whiteboard or the poem that we annotated on the second. Years ago, most of my students quickly said the list of facts is truer than the poem. And then I had to spend some time convincing them otherwise. Lately, though, there's been a lot more thought, and someone eventually calls out, both are true. And there are a lot of nods. I go, there we go. Either my school is producing better thinkers, or students are becoming less modern, or a combination of both. Either way, it's a good thing. What I hope to accomplish is to convince my students that important truths can't always be communicated in factual prose. It needs to be in poetic language. And if we can't communicate important truths about eagles using just objective factual language, how in the world are we supposed to talk about God? That's why 43% of the Bible is narrative. Another third is poetry. Less than a quarter is discourse. And none of the discourse in the Bible is modern discourse, in the sense that it's primarily concerned with facts, accuracy, certainty, and predictability. Biblical discourse is much more concerned with communicating truth in a world that considered truth a lot more important than any idea that they would have had as to what a fact was. There's this thing that students say right after a teacher has explained the meaning of a poem. Well, why didn't you just say that? That's probably an indication that the teacher blew it. And I'm not judging here, I've blown it too. We've failed if a student leaves the classroom with the impression that a poem communicates something that can be reduced to a simple statement. One of my favorite definitions of poetry is trying to say what cannot be said. The woe-ness of an eagle is much more than the statement, eagles are awesome, or eagles have wingspans 72 to 90 inches long. The truth needs more than a statement, or more than a list of facts. It needs a poem, because truth is bigger than fact. Our culture has been resistant to this broader understanding of truth for a long time, to its detriment. And we've become suspicious of poetry as a bunch of emotional fluff with alliteration and a rhyme scheme. We need to recover an appreciation for a poem's ability to communicate a truth beyond the facts. Imagine if a person could marshal all the power of poetry and then was also inspired by the truth imparted by the Holy Spirit. What a book that would be! Nothing in the Bible is presented to us in encyclopedic form. So there isn't much point in us reading it as an encyclopedia or a textbook. For us to understand most of the Bible, we need to understand how to read literature, and that there's a difference between truth and fact, and that if you want to explore the truth, you might need to read a poem or two. Thank you for watching. Till next time.